Hello, welcome to EDA Reports. My name is Jerry Gordon. I'm the President and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, which in 1964 was created by an act of the General Assembly, thus making this the 50th anniversary. So in this show today, we're going to discuss how the Economic Development Authority Commission has evolved over those years and how the program of the EDA has changed over those years as well. With us today we have two gentlemen, Mr. Earl Williams, who was chairman of the EDA in the mid and late 1970s, and was also a member of the Blue Ribbon Panel Commission on Economic Development of those days. Thanks for being here, Earl.
My pleasure.
We also have the current chairman, Steve Davis, of the Economic Development Authority, and Steve's been chairman for close to 10 years now, I think. So thank you very much for being here as well.
Thank you.
This is a fascinating topic for me because I've been through much of the 50 years, but not all of them, and you actually predated me with the EDA,
yes,
Earl.
Right.
Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the commission of those days and the program, how it evolved, and maybe a little bit about the Blue Ribbon Panel as well.
Well, the Blue Ribbon, in terms of my being involved in Fairfax County politics and economic development, the Blue Ribbon Committee actually predated. In fact, that's how I ended up on the committee, was that I made the presentation for the Blue Ribbon Committee. That was when I actually learned some of the movers and shakers in Fairfax County. I was green. I just moved here in 1970, and at that time, the Economic Development Authority was not on my radar screen at all. I had heard some things about it when Jack Harrity, who was then the chairman of the board, asked me to serve on the authority. My first reaction was I really wasn't interested, because I had heard that it was mostly a wine and cheese party. And he said he wanted somebody that would try to do something, make something out of the EDA. So with that understanding, I went on there and found an ally in the gentleman named Lee Schuer, and together we began the transformation of the authority into a working authority away from a wine and cheese society. And that was when we were able to go back to the Board of Supervisors and tell them if they wanted to implement the recommendations in the Blue Ribbon Committee report, they were going to have to fund it. We needed money. And that did not come easy, and not all of the commissioners were initially enthusiastic about it. But in the end, they all voted to increase EDA's budget. And the primary point of the increase was advertising. We said, you can't just sit here in Fairfax County and talk about economic development. You've got to reach out to companies and convince them that this is a good place to come. And one of the first things we did was run a double truck ad in the Wall Street Journal, and some of the citizens, anti-tax people, really went crazy about it and accused us of all sorts of nefarious things. One of them even went so far as to say that the reason it was a waste, not only spending the money in New York, but also he didn't know a single soul that read Wall Street Journal. So we took that for what we thought it was worth. And in the next 4 years, we changed the face of the authority, and we began the process of changing the face of Fairfax County.
In those days, what was the vision for the future of the county?
The vision was to develop a business base which would take the business industrial tax base and increase it so that the citizens of Fairfax County could get some of the services they wanted without having to pay for them directly on residential taxes. When Lee and I worked the problem, we went back to the Board of Supervisors. In fact, we made the statement that if they would give us the money that we were asking for, that we would take the business base, which was then at about, I think, 15.5%, 16% of the total and falling, and we would get that up to 25% in 10 years. One of the supervisors, as I finished my presentation, said that is mathematically impossible. And my response was, no, it's not mathematically impossible. I certainly concur that it's going to be very, very difficult. But the only thing I can guarantee you is if we don't try, we won't get there, because right now we're just continuing to fall. And as a matter of history, 10 years later, it actually came 26 to 27%.
That's right. And as a consequence, the tax rate has come down from those years to
Yes.
now I think it's $1.09.
If things had continued the way they were, I really don't know how the citizenry would have dealt with it, because we had no choice. We were either going to reduce the services, or we were going to increase taxes. There were there were only two things to do.
Yeah. I've looked at that report from the 1976 Commission, and it's clear that when a business pays a tax dollar, they take back far less in public services than they contribute. And so those are great tax dollars, and that's why they're residential. And the residential population was understood in those days to be increasing from roughly 450,000 in the late 70s to a 1990 figure of 800,000, which it did. So that was a critical vision.
It was critical, and making the point to the citizenry that it's just not pro-business. This is not some ideology. The fact of the matter is just as you said, that a business, first of all, occupies land. You can't put a house on it. But in the process of doing so, it returns more taxes to the county than it requires in services. And with residences, it's just the opposite. They require more services than they pay in taxes. And that's a powerful argument. You just need to get a chance to talk with the people about what it really means and what the alternatives are.
So Steve, we've evolved as a commission and as an economic development authority and as the programs that we operate. How, in your time frame as chairman and as a member as well, how's it changed, and what is the vision now?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank Earl and all those that preceded me. I think the commission's done a great job over the last 40 or 50 years. Been associated with it for the past 10 myself. So they made my life a lot easier when I stepped into the role, because there was obviously a great foundation laid already.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your comments about some of the early struggles that you had when you stepped into the seat. It's changed obviously quite a bit, and it continues to evolve. I think one of the things that strikes me is the push for the diversification of the business base that we've had, particularly over the last 10 years, and in particular the last 3 or 4 years, very directed towards specific sectors. And I'll point out a couple of examples. The hospitality sector, I think we've been very successful, and actually we're quite strong in that sector now, whereas 10 years ago probably wasn't recognized as a strength of Fairfax County as far as the business base. We now have a strategy set forward to increase our personalized medicine emphasis, medical device industry, leveraging the strong IT sector that we have here and seeing if we can put some things in combination. But I think most remarkably, the thing that's changed the most in my tenure, and I see evolving, is how we market the county and where we're marketing the county. We're into digital marketing. We're doing a lot of advertising through Google Ads as an example, which none of us thought we would be in 10 years ago, and I dare say 20 years ago, because it hadn't even been invented yet. And I think that's been very successful, and that it's given us much broader coverage, many more impressions than what we had in the traditional media. So that's one change that I think has been most noteworthy. There are quite a few others, but I think in looking back over this, the thing that's probably been the most successful for us is the sustainability of a foundational strategy. We've stayed in marketplaces. We don't enter marketplaces and come out as far as where we're out attracting businesses into Fairfax County. We're there for a long time. Our strategy is a long-term strategy, and I bet if we look back to Earl's day and we looked at some of the things that were developed as a strategy, they're pretty everlasting. We fundamentally haven't changed a lot of those. And then lastly, of course, it's a global marketplace, much more so than it was even 10 years ago. And we've been very successful in our marketing outreach efforts, particularly in our offices overseas. So those are some of the things that strike me, would be diversification, digital advertising, and how globalized we've become.
So what's next for the county in an economic sense? You mentioned personalized medicine and some of the new technologies. What other things do you see on the horizon, if anything?
Well, there's one other area that it's in its infancy stage, and we've still got a lot of work to do. We've just brought on board the EDA, as you well know, an expert in this area, but it's cybersecurity. We think there's a great opportunity there. Obviously, we have a lot of resources that we can leverage off of here, not only in the government sector, but also in the commercial space, defense contractors being here, and evidenced by what's happening in the world today. I certainly don't see that that's an area that's going to diminish in need. It's going to probably increase at a pace that we're not even anticipating now. So the EDA and the commission, the staff, we're always looking for new opportunities. We have a strategic retreat every year, which don't know if that happened in the past, but we started that or rekindled that about 6 or 7 years ago, I believe. It's been very successful. We bring in some outside voices to get some opinions and some things that perhaps we haven't thought of, and we put forth the strategy, and it's usually a tweaking of that foundational strategy in which we can emphasize sectors such as personalized medicine or cybersecurity. So I see that continuing in the future.
One of the things you mentioned, Earl, was the relationship with the Board of Supervisors. There have been some ups and downs, and boards have been generally supportive all the way throughout that 50-year period. There have been time frames when that wasn't as much the case as others.
I don't. Thinking about that, I don't think there was active hostility on the part of the board, but there were a lot of, did we make the right decision giving these guys this money, and this sort of thing. And about a year after we started the advertising campaign, Jack Harrity, who was the chairman of the Board of Supervisors at the time, came to me and said, "Where are the results?" And I said, "Jack, we've been at it a year. You know, we're hardly into this thing." He says, "Well, you have to do something." And I said, "What is it you want me to do?" Right. "I want results." And I said, "Well, we're not. If you by results you mean we're going to bring a dozen companies here in the next 12 months? It's not going to happen." So I said, "What? Suppose I could show you that people were reading the ads." And he said, "Oh yeah, that would be good." So we thought it would be kind of clever, and it turned out it was pretty clever. We started putting bingo cards in the magazines, and all you had to do was circle the one for EDA and pull a thing out. And we collected about 4,500 of those, I think, in a very short period of time. And that was great. Everybody calmed down after that. Now, even now, I'm a little bit reluctant to say it, but the fact of the matter is that many of those 4,000 came from kids writing papers and libraries and that sort of thing, and didn't really honestly go to the heart of what we were trying to do, but people got calm, and that was the main thing. They were very supportive most of the time. We had one upset when one of the board members said something or did something that was thought by one or more of the members of the Board of Supervisors to be a partisan political type thing. And oh my, there was a big to-do about that. So I said, okay, we'll just take this head on. And so I appointed myself as the chief investigator. And we went through it all. I checked it out, upside, downside. I checked all the people that had anything to say about it, who thought they knew anything about it. And when we got through, I wrote a fairly lengthy report, and at the end I said, there's an old saying that wherever there's smoke, there's fire. And many of you may be thinking that. But let me tell you, in this case, there's not even a smoldering ember. There's nothing here. And sent it off, and weeks went by, and we didn't hear anything. So I called Jack, and I said, "Jack, what's the reaction? What are the board members saying?" He says, "Huh, what was left to say after that report?"
Yeah, sort of a nutshell.
And so again, things calmed down. I would say, by and large, the board was generally supportive, because as we moved on, we did begin to show results. Companies did begin to come into Fairfax County. It was very slow at the beginning, but they saw that this was something that was going to work, and life got easier for economic development people.
Steve, the current Board of Supervisors has been very, very supportive of the Economic Development Authority and the concept of growth. How do you relate with the current board?
Well, absolutely, I agree with your statement. I think there's a recognition, hopefully built up over the years through the prior efforts and the efforts of the current staff and the board members of success that we've brought, and the importance, again, of sustainability, that you can't just come in and out of the market. And I think the best evidence of that has been when we have gone through the tougher economic times, which we just went through here in the last several years, the board's willingness to step forward and sustain our funding, sustain the overall support level, recognize the efforts and the importance of the EDA in bringing businesses, new businesses, as well as retaining the businesses that are here, how critically important that is to the county overall. I think that's the best evidence, and I would concur. I think the board has shown a lot of confidence, and we really appreciate that, and I think we have a outstanding relationship with the Board of Supervisors overall.
It's a county that to some extent sells itself because it is such a great, it has great services, a great climate, an extraordinary population, high quality labor force. That wasn't necessarily the same 50 years or 30 years ago.
I was sitting there thinking, as you were saying that, wasn't always like that.
Right.
We were operating off of a fairly limited base in terms of what we could say about the county. But that's why we used the picture of the Capitol in our advertising in the magazines. That was the draw that we were using. Come to Fairfax County, live in Virginia, but your custom across the river is very close, and you can get there in a matter of minutes. And that was the push. And it worked for a long time. The companies that came in, even today, whatever they may say, a lot of the companies that have moved here to be close to their customers.
And that's changing. Yeah, the federal government's not what it used
absolutely,
to be.
it has changed, because now we are recognized as being major employment center.
Right.
And we've got several markets that are quite significant employment centers. If you start to break down the county into some of these sub-markets, you recognize, and you look at the numbers, how truly significant some of the employment numbers are. Yeah. The office space that we have in some of the major markets in Fairfax County, you know, we're right up there in the top of a lot of the list, and the envy of a lot of other municipalities and localities. They'd love to be in our position right now.
We have, when you were chairman, Earl, I think we had fewer than 20 million square feet of office space.
Yeah, I don't, whatever you say, but it wasn't a lot.
Right. Today we have 18 million square feet that's vacant,
right,
countywide.
I did not know that. Oh, you mean in the
whole
county lodge? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
18 million feet. That's more than Loudoun has space. It's more than Richmond has space total. So can we fill it?
We think so. That's our job. That's our intent, and that's what our mission is. And again, we can't rest on our laurels. I need to say that. You know, there's a tendency in any game, business, sports event, competition, when you get out ahead, you know, there's a tendency sometimes to get complacent and rest on your laurels. We cannot afford for that to happen. That's why it's important to sustain the programs that we have, the strategy, the funding, everything that we've experienced in the past. So we've got to keep the pedal to the metal. That's what we're doing, and that's why we're always looking for new opportunities. So to answer your question, I'm pretty confident we can.
You used an interesting word, competition. This is a highly competitive business today, not so much in the 70s. Fairfax was really in the forefront of some of this.
Well, everything in the region was different. And so it's very difficult to make those kind of comparisons. When we started, it was very clear that we were going to concentrate on companies that had an interest in the federal government, because that's the only thing we had going for us at that point. And with that base, though, you've been able to go out, and those companies that came here represent a draw now to other companies to come here. And so this thing feeds on itself, which is right. What was the plan all along, but it took a little longer than I thought to get it going. But Steve and his board have obviously made that work.
Yeah, you're pointing out something that's really, really important. The attraction of some of the major employers is really important because of what comes in behind them. They've got service providers, contractors, sometimes a very large contractor base that they're dependent on. So the ripple effect when we bring in a major employer is probably 3- or 4-fold what the job numbers are for the prime employer who's coming in. But that's not to say that we don't place a lot of importance on the small and medium businesses and the entrepreneurs and startups coming in, because we do. If you look at the overall makeup of the workforce here, the overwhelming majority comes from small business base, right, medium-sized business base, not the larger employers. We have a tendency sometimes to put the spotlight on them, and we love to have the major employers here, of course, but it's what they bring in behind them that's even more important to us in many respects.
A good point, and let me tell you, this has been an issue all the way back when. In order to get the support of an organization, I don't remember what it was called, the Group of 100 or something like that, but anyway, John Lynch, who later came on the board, was the head of that, and he was a very powerful individual, and we needed his support, and all that group asked for, they said, we want you to look hard and support the small businesses that are already here. If we're going to spend this county money, it can't all be spent on bringing new people in. We have to support the companies that are here, and we're particularly interested in small business. And John was a very articulate presenter of that information, and we bought into it quickly. It was never an issue. It just had not come to the attention of the rest of us that this was going to be important.
Yeah, and just to play off that point, if I could, Jerry, for a second, I think that the viewpoint is very much one of a balanced program between business attraction and business retention. Jerry knows this full well, but the marketing folks on the staff, they all have a quota of how many marketing visits they're supposed to participate in on an annual basis or a monthly basis. And a large component of that is visiting, sitting down, getting input from the businesses that are here, obviously with a bent toward retention of those businesses in Fairfax County. So it's very much a balanced program.
Yeah, exactly right. We visit 1,500 businesses in Fairfax County every year and have done for 20, 25 years now. So we have quite an intel base built up of what their needs are. Businesses in the county, retaining businesses, growing new businesses is the other way you can grow an economy. George Mason University was fledgling, was taking baby steps in those days, but you and George Johnson and a few others, Till Hazel, built that university to what it is today.
That's an interesting thing about EDA too. Maybe a lot of people in the audience don't know what happened at George Mason in that time period. It went from being a 2-year school to become a 4-year university. And Till Hazel was largely responsible for bringing George Johnson here to be president. And I was at a meeting one day. I had never met George. It was a meeting one day, and he was the speaker. And when the talk was over, people were standing around. He came over to me, introduced himself, and said, I understand you're chairman of the EDA. And I said, yes, I am. He said, what would you think about having a university here in your midst that was supported by, but also primarily interested in helping the business community? And my response was, when do we start? And his answer was now. And we did build a support group for George Mason University, and a lot of it flowed out of that Blue Ribbon Committee report. The people that met and put that report together ended up being some of the strongest advocates for George Mason University. And just in case you have forgotten or you weren't here, the downstate politicians did not like Northern Virginia very much at all. And so getting money for George Mason was like pulling teeth.
So the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same.
Yes.
Jerry, a couple other things that I think have changed quite a bit over the last few years as compared to when the EDA first started out. And I may not completely have all the background, having not been there, of course, but a couple of other things strike me. One is the enormous capability that's been built up at the EDA with our real estate division and helping businesses when they come here. So it's a service that's provided for free. Where can I go? What's available? You know, tell me about the area. Meet with some of the brokers. Meet with the building owners if necessary. Find out more about the facilities. That's a service that's offered day in and day out, and I think it's quite widely used and perhaps not very well known, frankly. The other is there's part of the staff is dedicated to venture capital attraction, which is critically important for bringing in the entrepreneurs and the startup businesses. So it's a bit of matchmaking. That's really what the service is intended to be, is to find out what the particular financing needs are for the startup businesses and match them up with like VCs who are interested in those particular sectors for that amount of money for upfront financing that may be required. And that's also been successful. And then one we hit on already, or I hit on earlier, which has changed probably the most in my opinion, and that is the shift in the emphasis toward the representation outside the U.S. and in our 2 U.S. offices that are in the U.S. that are in other vicinities where we would like to compete even more. And we haven't really mentioned that, and perhaps a lot of people aren't familiar with where we're located, but we have a representative office in India, Korea, the UK, Germany, Israel. We have an office on the West Coast in the Los Angeles basin, which actually serves the whole West Coast region, and we recently opened up an office in Boston.
Thank you for mentioning that. Those are productive exercises. We get much more than a one-to-one return on that investment. I'm afraid we're out of time, so Earl Williams, Steve Davis, thank you not only for joining us today, but for your service to the community and for bookending the Economic Development Authority's 50 years on this our 50th anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think Steve deserves a lot of credit for agreeing to be chairman of the Economic Development Authority for 10 years. I was only 2, and that was enough.
Well, I'm fortunate in neither event. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today on EDA Reports.